Well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to talk about a subject that is very important to me. So important that I made it the topic of the first chapter of the Laws of Human Nature, namely human rationality, or actually the opposite, human irrationality. What makes us human beings such damned irrational creatures? And it is my opinion that obviously we're now going through a pandemic of a coronavirus, something physical, something very real. But I also believe that we're going through a pandemic of irrationality, and the psychological and the physical are feeding off each other. The pandemic is making us more irrational. The more irrational we become, we're actually making the pandemic worse, on and on and on and on. So I'm going to get to this a little later. But first, I want to discuss a common misconception that people have about human rationality, one that I often get myself that people think comes from my books, which it doesn't. And basically, this misconception is that rationality involves the suppression or the repression of emotions. In other words, if you're feeling fear or anger or love or hatred, you have to tamp down those emotions. You have to get rid of them in order to be emotional. And in that way, in this view, rationality isn't something very fun or very exciting. It's kind of like health food. It's good for you, but it doesn't taste very good. But I want to tell you that this is actually quite wrong. It's actually the opposite. Rationality involves some very important emotions that if you're not experiencing, you can't begin to think rationally. And neuroscience has demonstrated this with studies of people who've had damage to the emotional centers in their brain, and after that they are not capable of making rational decisions or rational thinking. But I think I can illustrate my idea with perhaps some examples from your own life. So let's say you have a plan, something you want to accomplish in life. There's a book you want to write. You want to lose weight or something. And normally, you're feeling very frustrated and impatient with the course of your life. And so you decide, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to actually get this project done. I'm going to create this business or whatever it is. And you think about it, and you take steps one by one by one to get there. Or let's say you're dealing with a nasty divorce situation, and the person you're dealing with, you're fighting over custody over your child, whom you love very much. And it's getting so nasty that you realize if it keeps going this way, the child will actually be damaged by this process. And so at some point, you take a step back and you go, what's really important is the long-term health of my child. And so I'm not going to get involved in this process. I'm actually going to back off, and I'm going to think of what's best for him or her. Or let us say finally in the third example, there's a very toxic person involved in your life, some kind of raging narcissist, for instance, that's getting you enmeshed in all of this drama that's making you miserable. And at some point you tell yourself, damn it, I've had enough of this person. I'm going to figure out a way to get rid of them in my life. But it's not easy because they're entwined in all of these relationships, etc. So you step back and you get control of yourself and you think, how can I get rid of this person? And then you do it, and then finally they're gone, and you feel a tremendous sense of relief. So let us look at these three examples. So in the first one, you're kind of fed up with the fact that you're overweight, or that you haven't been able to accomplish any of your dreams or desires in life. And that frustration, that emotion, impels you to take action, which is to go through the steps of thinking rationally of how to get out of this. And then when it's over, when you finally have realized the project, you feel a tremendous sense of relief and pride. Let's say in the case of the child, you're impelled by the sense of empathy and love for the child, and you're worried about it. And that love makes you go through this rational process. And when it's over, you feel so much better about yourself. or with that toxic person in your life. You finally reach a point where you say, damn it, I've had enough. This can't go on. You're angry. You're full of anger. You step back, you take rational steps, you get rid of them, and you feel joy and relief. So if you didn't feel these emotions at first, you would never be able to take the action that will lead you to some kind of rational decision. And if you did not feel the rewards of pride, of empathy and love, of accomplishing something, you would never be motivated to go through the rational process again and again and again. So rationality involves emotions and thinking, but the problem is you need to create a balance between them. And I like to compare this to the metaphor of the rider and the horse. The rider is your rational thinking, your mind, and the horse is your emotions, your energy, your power, the animal part of your nature. If the rider is too dominating, if you're afraid and you want to control that horse and make sure it does everything you want, you hold the reins really tight, you squeeze your thighs really hard into the sides of the horse won't respond or do anything because it picks up that you're trying to control it too much. But if out of fear of trying to work with the horse, you just let it go and do whatever it does, it can become very dangerous. The horse can ride wherever at very fast speeds. What you need is a balance between the two, a harmony between the two. So you, the intelligent part of the equation, understands the animal, knows that it has to control it to some degree, but can't over-control it. And then working in harmony, you can channel that powerful energy that comes from the animal part of our nature that actually makes us accomplish things and do things. You can channel it for productive purposes. So please keep this in mind. Rationality is not about tamping down your emotions. It's about creating this beautiful harmony, this balance between the thinking process and the emotional animal parts of our nature. Okay, now I want to discuss what is rationality, or what is my theory of rationality. And I say that basically it is our bridge to reality. And I like to think of these realities as kind of these circles that begin from inside of us and that widen out wider and wider and wider to encompass the entire world and the entire universe. What do I mean by that? Well, first you begin with yourself. And the idea is you don't know yourself. You don't know who you are. You don't know why you behave the way you do. You don't know why you have certain emotions, why you have certain ideas, why you make certain decisions. You're basically a mystery, a puzzle to yourself. The next layer is the people around you, your family, your friends, the people you interact with every day. You think you know them, but you don't know them at all. You're projecting your own emotions onto them, your own thoughts and wishes. You're locked inside of your head, and you're not really understanding at the core of the people that you're dealing with. Widen that out even further to the groups that you interact with, perhaps your office or your community. As I talk about in The Laws of Human Nature, any group of people have a kind of culture, a kind of group mentality. You're not understanding that culture. You're not thinking about it. You're not entering into that spirit, and because of that, you make all kinds of mistakes and misjudgments. Widen that out even further to the entire globe, to what is going on in the world, politically and economically, what we could call the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. By not understanding what is really going on in the world, by being locked in your own head, with your own desires and wishes, you have no actual conception of what is really happening in the world right now. Now, these realities have two essential qualities. First, they're contingent. They depend on you as an individual. So my reality as to who I am and the people I deal with isn't the same as yours. I have to treat it as it is something special to me, and I have to try and pierce that. And the second thing is, these realities are hidden from our view. If I just simply look at people, I don't understand them. If I just simply look at myself in the mirror, I don't know who I am. You have to make effort to try and figure out what's really going on underneath the appearances. But then there are three realities that we have to deal with that are not hidden, that are very obvious, and they're not individual or contingent. They are universal. The first one is death. We all have to die. As Jim Morrison said, no one here gets out alive. There's nobody in the world who's going to escape this basic reality that we all have to deal with. The second reality is that life involves pain and suffering and difficulties and setbacks and failures. Some of that are things we can't help, some of it's physical, and some of it comes from the people that we have to interact with. But this pain is inevitable in life. And the third reality is we humans can never ever know anything for certain. Our knowledge, our brains are limited. The best that we can ever do, and science has backed this up with like quantum mechanics, the best that we can ever do is to get the probabilities. This is probably who I am. This is probably what people are like. You can never ever know anything for certain. Now with this laid down as a foundation, we can make a very clear dividing line. To the degree that you understand who you are, that you make an effort to do that you make an effort to get outside of your brain and understand the people you deal with, that you try to understand the zeitgeist, what is going on in the world, you are becoming a rational person. And the decisions that you make will be powerful and effective as a result of that. But to the degree that you stay inside yourself and you lock and you don't try and understand these realities, you don't understand yourself, people, what's going on in the world, you deny the reality that you're going to die soon or any day now, that there's pain and suffering in the world, that you don't know anything for certain, to that degree, you are detaching yourself from reality. And you're not aware of this, but as you detach yourself from reality, you start making bad decisions in life. You create your own drama, you create your own misery, you create your own bad decisions, and you lead a very unhappy and life full of tragedies that don't need to be there. And in a world like ours today, where things are moving and changing so quickly and so fast, this divorce from reality that so many people out there are suffering from is extremely dangerous. You're not aware of it, but it is the source of so many of the problems in your life. Okay, now that we've defined what rationality is, what is the process? How do we go through a mental process to actually be rational? Well, in fact, it's remarkably simple. Let us say we have some kind of plan, like I mentioned before. We want to get into good shape, or we want to write a book or start a business. Or let's say we want to sell something. We want to persuade people to fund our movie, or we're selling a product. Or let us say we have a problem to solve. We naturally begin with an idea in our heads, right? We have a theory. We have an idea about what we need to do and what is the best way to go. And this theory that we inevitably begin with, because we are thinking creatures, is also inevitably subjective. It has a large amount of wishes and emotions and desires mixed in with it. But there's nothing wrong with that. Even scientists, even Albert Einstein begins his theory with ideas that aren't necessarily connected to anything real. But then we go the next step. And the next step is perhaps we do some research about our book or project or about the regimen we want to go through. We do some research about the people we're trying to sell to. We do some research about the problem. And with that research, we get evidence, we get feedback, and we realize, my original idea, it needs some fixing, or I was really off base. I need to really change my idea. So we go through a mental process and we adapt that original theory or idea. And then we go further. We launch our book, we write the book and we launch it, or we launch the product, or we actually try to persuade that other person, or we do an experiment and we see results. We get actual real-time feedback. And that feedback tells us, Robert, your idea really sucked. You had no idea what you were totally divorced from reality. You need now to really, really adapt your idea, okay? And you go through that on and on and on, cycling through this process, continually thinking, reacting to what reality tells you, adapting your thoughts, constantly going through this process as far as you can take it. I compare this to like a drill going through a piece of wood. And each time you think and get feedback, it goes further. And then you do it again and it goes further, deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into that piece of wood, getting to the reality, the core of who people are, the core of the problem you're trying to solve, the core of your plan and how to sell it, okay? But to the degree that you suddenly stop, you simply stay there with your own idea and you don't actually respond to the evidence, zzz, that little drill, it short circuits and it's not working anymore. Or the moment you stay locked into just looking at the data and you stop thinking about what it means, which a lot of people do nowadays, zzz, it short circuits again and it stops working and the drill stops and you're divorcing and you're detaching yourself from reality slowly by surely, okay? Now this is an incredibly beautiful, powerful process that you must adapt immediately in your life. I can't say it often enough. But this process requires that you have 3 emotional strengths, 3 essential attitudes, okay? The first attitude is that your mind is open. You have a free spirit. You're willing to let the doors open and all kinds of ideas and evidence come in that you now look at. And the main thing that's going to stop you from that is that you have an ego, that you have insecurity, that you feel that you have to be right, that your intelligence is at stake. And when that evidence comes in that shows you that maybe you were wrong, your ego goes, stop, no, I don't want to go any further. Instead, you have to keep your mind really open, very flexible. And that's what you're going to do. You, the people listening to me, you're going to adapt this open mind and take whatever the world shows you and adapt your ideas to it. The second quality that you must have is patience. You must be a saint of patience. Because inevitably, as you go through that drilling process that I mentioned, you're going to have problems, you're going to have setbacks, you're going to have criticisms, you're going to have things that don't quite match what you thought were going to happen. And you're going to get impatient. And when you get impatient, you're going to stop that process. You're going to block yourself up. And you're going to say, no, I've already got it all figured out. And you won't continue on drilling, going deeper and deeper. So you're promising me now, you out there, you're going to maintain this patience that'll see you out through the entire process. The third quality that you must have is fearlessness. And this is the absolute most important one. And what I mean by this is the following. We human beings tend to be incredibly conventional animals. We get ideas from our parents, from our schooling, from the people around us, and that becomes how we think about everything in the world. We stop thinking for ourselves. And with social media, this has become much worse, all right? And we're afraid to think of ourselves. I think the classic example of this cowardice in thinking comes from academics, the people who were supposed to be the most brilliant thinkers of all. They have been submerged in this particular way of looking at the world, filled with jargon, filled with things, deconstructivism, blah, blah, blah. This is what the world is like. And they can never get outside of it. Everything they write, everything they see, everything they think about is in that little bubble that they have been inundated with in their academic training. You need to be fearless. You need to be able to get rid of everything you've ever believed in before. You need to get rid of all the strategies you've used, all the conventional ideas, and think for yourself and not be tied to what other people have told you is reality, okay? With your fearlessness, with your patience, and with your open spirit, you can't help but make that process work for you. But then we have to ask ourselves a question. Robert, that process is so simple. Why are there so many goddamn irrational people in the world? Why are people so stupid? Why are they making so many bad decisions? Why am I so irrational? And in that I say me, Robert Greene, as well. Why do I make so many stupid decisions? Why do I act on impulses? Why am I not capable of thinking before I react? Why can't I go through that process you just enumerated? Well, the answer is simple. I talked earlier about the rider and the horse. You don't have the proper balance. The horse, the animal, is running rampant and you're not in control. And the problem is you're not to blame. I'm not trying to affix guilt on this. We are irrational creatures because of the way our brains are wired. Let me explain that for a second and go a little bit into the neuroscience of that because it's very important. If you look at the human brain, you can almost see it in a vertical kind of alignment. On the top is the neocortex, which is the rational part of our brains. It's what was called the executive function. It's what kind of controls our thinking and what we rely upon for our decisions. The further down you go in the actual literal alignment of this brain, you come upon systems that are more and more primitive. That neocortex that we humans have was really only developed in the last 150,000 years with language and consciousness, where it became much more sophisticated. But these older parts of the brain that you go further down are extremely primitive. And you arrive at systems like the limbic system that controls our emotion, which is extremely ancient, perhaps the most ancient of all. We find it in reptiles, in the fear response, in fight or flight. This goes back hundreds of millions of years, okay? But the thing about these two systems is the neocortex is actually very weak. It has these little nervous signals, these electrical signals that we respond to but are actually weak, a lot weaker compared to the emotions that are driven by the limbic system. When we feel an emotion, powerful hormones are injected into our blood. We've all felt, for instance, adrenaline when we feel fear or frightened. We also feel dopamine and serotonin and all kinds of other things like that. These emotions, these chemicals in our bloodstream, grab our attention. They are much more powerful than those weak little electrical signals that are coming from the neocortex. So we are paying so much more attention to those feelings of excitement or fear or whatever, and we can't help it. And the other thing to know is the neocortex here and the limbic system here, they come from two different parts of the brain that are not really very well connected. They developed in two different periods of history, okay? So what that means is you have no conscious access to what your limbic system is churning up. You have no conscious access to those feelings and those emotions you have. You don't understand them. They're not, the part of your brain that is used to language thinking in terms of words is not connecting to those emotions. So you can't understand why you're afraid or why you're feeling excited or why you're angry because you have no conscious access to those emotions. You can begin to think about them, but you don't really understand where they come from or what triggered them. You don't have the words. This is often something we all experience. You're depressed, but you don't know why, and you don't really have the words to explain why. That's because these two parts of our brain are divorced from each other. Now, from this divorce stems all of the misery in the world, all of the turmoil, the bloodshed, the madness, that insanity that we humans have injected over 6,000 years of our history. And what that means is, for instance, let us say that we have a plan or an idea or a strategy. We're not aware, we think that we're being rational and strategic. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. We're not aware of how those emotions are infecting our plans in a very insidious fashion. So think of the brain as almost being on this kind of slope. And our thoughts naturally veer towards what our emotions tell us. They naturally veer away from pain and towards what is pleasurable, towards what we want to hear, towards what we want to see in people, to what our desires and wishes and what we find pleasant. Our brain naturally goes down that slope to what we want to see is pleasant and good. And this infects our ideas, our strategies, and how we look at the world. I call this the rosy scenario. So that when we're thinking of our screenplay or of our project that we're going to create or of our plan to sell something, we naturally imagine that everyone's going to love it, that we're going to have brilliant success, that money's just going to flow in, that we know exactly what we're going to do, that if we invade Iraq, people are going to be greeting us with flowers. Or if we show our screenplay to some producer, he's going to shower us with millions of dollars. Okay? So that's how the brain naturally veers towards it. Some people, their brains naturally veer towards the negative. I'd say the minority of people, where they're always thinking, nothing's going to work. Everyone's going to hate me. This is bad, bad, bad. But that's also part of an emotional response. It's not governed by a relationship to reality. So that's the first part of the equation. Emotions infect our decisions, our strategies, and all of our actions in life, and we can't see it. The second thing that happens is, because of that, we select the evidence that comes in. Remember I talked about that second part of the process, which is getting feedback? As evidence comes in, as reality floods our brain, we select what we want to see. We select the things that are pleasant to us. We select the things we had already predetermined to believe in. I know this happened to me, when I was even writing my book, The Laws of Human Nature. I have a particular predisposition towards thinking something kind of negative about human nature. I can't help it. It was part of the 48 Laws of Power, and everybody who reads my books knows that. And I started realizing I'm only looking at books that kind of emphasize that negative aspect. Robert, you're being irrational. You're selecting evidence. So I had to go in and force myself to read books that emphasize that other aspect of human nature, books that I normally hate to read. The books by Steven Pinker, for example, about our better natures and enlightenment now. I had to read them to force myself to not go down that slope, okay? Because what happens when you go down that, when you select your evidence, right? The reason you do that is, if evidence comes in that you were wrong, if evidence comes in that you voted for a president, for instance, who is incompetent, stupid, and irrational, to admit that you were wrong, means that you have to admit that you were perhaps a little bit stupid, a little bit foolish, which is nothing wrong with, because we're all stupid and we're all foolish at times. But as the great philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said, we humans would rather believe that we're ugly, we would rather believe that we are evil, but we will never ever believe that we're stupid. To believe that we're stupid goes down a level that we can never admit to ourselves. Even the person who is the least educated, and there's nothing wrong with that, never wants to believe that they're wrong. They believe that they're intelligent in what they do. And so because of that, we convince ourselves that our original idea, even though evidence shows the opposite, is actually the right idea. This is known as cognitive dissonance. We get evidence that shows that perhaps we made a mistake or that we were wrong in our assessment. But rather than admit that, we will double down on our original idea and believe it even more firmly than ever before. We will yell and scream and be even more louder that we made the right decision, okay? And this is what you see in all the people around you. I call it the conviction bias. If I believe in it loud enough, if I'm filled with enough anger and vitriol and hatred, if I show so much sincerity in what I express, how could I be wrong? Because my sincerity proves that I'm right. This is why there are so many goddamn irrational people in the world. The evidence comes in, they absolutely refuse to see it, they only see what they want to see, and then they double down on their original stupid, unrealistic, irrational assessment by being more angry and more certain of themselves. So now I want to talk about what we're going through in the world today. But strangely enough, I want to first direct our attention to 2,500 years ago approximately, to a story that I relate in The Laws of Human Nature, the story that opens the book. And it's the story of ancient Athens. Sometimes in history there occurs something that's kind of a paradigm that sort of shows throughout history the paradigm of something very human. And this story is the absolute most superb paradigm of human irrationality that exists. And it's the story of Pericles. Pericles is the great leader of what is called the Golden Age of ancient Athens in the 5th century BC. He has led ancient Athens through its most glorious period of arts, of architecture, of science, etc. But then, in the year 432 BC, Athens' arch enemy, Sparta, comes and with its representative says, look, Athens, in order to have peace with us, here are our terms. if you don't agree to these terms, we're going to go to war with you and we're going to destroy you. And the Athenians are all in an uproar. They don't want to go to war, but they're very afraid. Some people are hawks. No, let's go fight the Spartans. Others are doves. Let's agree to their peace terms. And then Pericles himself gives a very powerful speech in which he kind of cuts the middle line and he says, we are going to go to war with Sparta. People are surprised because Pericles never likes war. But we're going to do it in a very strange way. We're going to bring all of the citizens into the city of Athens. We're not going to fight Spartans' very powerful army as they try to invade us. We're going to stay inside of our walls. And while they try and destroy us, there'll be no enemy to fight. They'll get very frustrated. We're going to go on our ships because Athens is a naval power, and we're going to go raid their cities that they've left behind undefended. And we're going to irritate the hell out of them, causing these little pinpricks that are going to weaken them. In the meantime, not fighting them directly. And even though this strategy involves some pain and suffering, and that we're going to watch the Spartans kind of destroy the countryside around Athens, in the end, they will be so weakened by our brilliant kind of retreat strategy that they will come to terms on our peace terms. They will have to meet us what we want. It will work. The Athenians aren't so sure, but finally they agree to it. And so the war begins. And as Pericles predicted, people are a little bit grumbling because they're not fighting and the Spartans are destroying the countryside. But then, in the year 430 BC, suddenly a plague breaks out in Athens. The most plague anyone has ever seen. People are dying left, right, and center in the most horrific fashion. And as Pericles had foreseen, people are suddenly freaking out and are really doubting his strategy. And I want to read to you what then happens from perhaps, people often ask me, Robert, what's your favorite book? One of my favorite books of all time happens to be this, Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. It is perhaps the greatest history book. It is so dramatic, it's so brilliant. Please, if you don't read this, you're not really educated in history. I had to read it when I first studied ancient Greek, and it's one of the hardest things I ever had to do in my life. Anyway, I want to read to you some passages from the book at this moment. So understand, the plague is broken out in 430. The Athenians are freaking out. So I quote from Thucydides. Now they began to blame Pericles for having persuaded them to go to war and to hold him responsible for all the misfortunes which had overtaken them. They became eager to make peace with Sparta and actually sent ambassadors there who failed to achieve anything. They were then in a state of utter hopelessness, and all their angry feelings turned against Pericles. And so Pericles himself gave a speech to buttress up the Athenians. And he said, "Is it not wrong to act as you are doing now? For you have been so dismayed by disaster in your homes that you are losing your grip on the common safety, on reality. You are attacking me for having spoken in favor of war and yourselves for having voted for it." He goes on, "It is a policy which entails suffering, and each one of you already knows what this suffering is." He's referring to his strategy. "But its ultimate benefits are still far away and not yet clear for all to see. So, now that a great and sudden disaster has fallen on you," meaning the plague, "you have weakened in carrying out to the end the resolves which you made. When things happen suddenly, unexpectedly, and against all calculation, it takes out the heart of a man. And this certainly has happened to you. We all look with distaste on people who arrogantly pretend to a reputation to which they are not entitled. But equally to be condemned are those who, through lack of moral fiber, fail to live up to the reputation which is theirs already. Each of you, therefore, must try to stifle his own particular sorrow as he joins with the rest in working for the safety of us all." He then concludes, "This was the old Athenian way. Do not let any act of yours prevent it from still being so. Remember, too, that the reason why Athens has the greatest name in all the world is because she has never given in to adversity. Hatred does not last for long, but the brilliance of the present is the glory of the future, stored up forever in the memory of man. To face calamity with a mind as unclouded as may be, and quickly to react against it, that in a city, an individual, is real strength and real power. Okay, and then you probably know the tragedy that ensued. Pericles himself died of the plague, and then all hell broke loose in Athens. All of the demagogues, all of the con artists, all of the populace started rising up and coming up with their own incredibly irrational ideas about what Athens could do. And then a businessman named Cleon, who thought he was so great, who was the most demagogic and populist of them all, he rose to power. He hated Pericles. He started trying to do everything the opposite of what Pericles promulgated. And then the hawks rose to power, and they decided, we're going to go to war with Sparta, and they came up with a strategy that they thought was brilliant. Their strategy was that they were going to evade the city of Syracuse on the island of Sicily. Syracuse was a key ally of Sparta. It supplied it with much of its resources. If they knocked out Syracuse, not only would Athens become an even more glorious empire, but they would really knock out the pillar of Spartan strength. Well, the war begins, they do it. Everyone thought this is going to be the greatest thing that ever happened, certain of success, and it turned into an incredible disaster. The brilliant Athenian navy was completely wiped out, and essentially, after many years of struggle, Athens had to surrender. And in surrendering, that golden era of the Periclean golden era, the ancient Athens that we knew and that we celebrate, was destroyed. It ended forever. The Athenian Empire was over. And in the ensuing century, an incredible outbreak of irrationality took over the ancient Athenians. Okay. Now you might ask yourself, Robert, do you see some parallels between what is happening now between ancient Athens and America? Yes, I do. Obviously, I do. Okay? So, to go through that, first of all, the Athenians before this happened obviously had some pre-existing irrationality that the plague only accentuated. Well, we, in the world, not just Americans, but in the world, we had a pre-existing condition. And namely, I believe that we were going through a period of incredible irrationality spurred by social media. I think there were many causes for this, but I believe social media kind of sent human irrationality into a warp speed. Social media is actually a brilliant tool for human communication, but it's not very good for rational discourse. It's a medium that plays on our most base emotions. It plays on our envy. It plays on our tribal spirits. We glom onto that little group on the internet that has the same opinions of us, and everybody outside that bubble is evil and awful. Just like the ancient Athenians thought if you were a hawk or a dove, the other side was evil, was corrupt, was an elitist, a snob. And so on and on and on. Our fear, our envy, our anger, our hatred, our tribalism, all of these are deeply, deeply accentuated by social media. Try and think of how many times you've come away from your interactions with Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever it is, feeling, wow, I really learned something. I really feel calm and I really feel like I've made myself more rational. I bet you it's pretty damn rare. Okay? So then the coronavirus occurs, and this pre-existing irrationality suddenly is exploded. All right? Now, I talked earlier about reality. Rationality is our bridge to reality. All right, well, let's just get a goddamn grip on what the reality is here, okay? It's very simple. It is a virus. A virus is not a living organism. There's some debate on it. It's kind of in a gray area, but it's not really, truly a living organism. It's something that exists by a rigorous mathematical logic. When it infects someone, if that person can then infect one person, more than one person, in other words, if over 1,000 people in a group, if they can infect 1.1 person, more than one, then this virus can spread itself more and more and more out of control. You can never get control of it. But if you can bring that down below 1, if it infects less than 1 person, then you can bring slowly those numbers down. The other thing is that there's a lag. So when people are first infected, we don't really have a total sense of what's going to happen in the weeks and months to come, because that process of infecting more than 1 person has an exponential factor. So it's not just simply that it increases, but it increases by powers of 2, by 3, by 4, and it can explode across the population. That is the reality. Now, who studies this reality? It is not TV commentators. It is not economists. It is not politicians. It is epidemiologists, scientists, immunologists. That's their specialty. And when they look at a virus like this, which is new, they don't know what it is. It's a new virus. So they're learning as much as we're learning. And the evidence, remember, evidence comes in. They reassess their original idea. Yeah, masks will do this, blah, blah, blah. More evidence comes in. They realize what really makes people immune, etc. Slowly, slowly, they bore into the reality of that virus. They come up with a vaccine, and they figured it out, and they save lives. Okay? That's the simple process that occurs. All right? But there's something about this virus that, and of course, I'm sorry, and they come up with a strategy, the strategy that we're all very familiar with. That strategy is, like Pericles, you have to take a step back. You have to do some pain and some sacrifice, the equivalent of not doing battle with Sparta, of bringing everybody in. You have to go through some sacrifice, and eventually, after 2 or 3 months, you get control of it, and then you can advance, right? But the problem that we're facing here is the coronavirus feeds all of our most irrational tendencies. Number one, it's hidden. We can't see it. We don't know where we're getting it. There's no enemy. It's not like Sparta. We can say that's the enemy. We can't see it. It's not a living thing. Second of all, it has that lag between here's the actual disease and here are the effects, the consequences of it. And in that lag, we can think that things are under control when they're not. And then it increases in exponential degrees. And as neuroscientists have demonstrated, the human brain isn't geared for understanding exponential factors. We can only think in terms of simple math. We don't understand the concept that things can suddenly explode. All right? So if that is the landscape that we're dealing with, the pre-existing social media irrationality, and then bang, this coronavirus in our face, I can see and we can see signs all around us of this incredibly spreading pandemic of human stupidity and of human irrationality. Evidence number one is the belief that it's a hoax. Now, I've studied several plagues in my encountering, in my reading of history, but I can never think of anybody saying that the plague itself is a hoax. And the reason is, when you're in Athens in 430 BC, or you're in London in 1665, you're seeing people dying left, right, and center on the street with the most horrifying pustules on their body, with their bodies exploding. They're going literally insane. Nobody would think that's a hoax. It's so real. But we, in our industrialized modern world, people are dying locked away in hospitals. We never have to see it. We never have to deal with it as a reality. And so we can imagine this isn't really happening. This is just a conspiracy of blah, 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 blah. This is the outer limits of human stupidity and human rationality. If you could just put these people inside the hospitals and see them, they would be bitch slapped by the reality and they would drop their incredibly stupid ideas. But the other thing is the plethora of conspiracy theories that are sprouting up like mushrooms everywhere. Now, conspiracy theories are normal in a plague time. Even people in Athens thought that the plague was infiltrated by the Spartans, which isn't the case. And people would always blame Jews for starting the plague. That was a common trope. It's understandable because conspiracies give us a very simple explanation of what's going on. We don't have to think very hard. We have this little tight, neat little narrative. This is what's really going on. But if we're talking about that drilling into reality, the moment you think, well, it's Bill Gates that started it, it short circuits and we don't drill anymore. Or it's 5G, it stops boring into reality. Or you see pandemic, or it's George Soros, you're not dealing with reality anymore. You're stopping the process, you're living in your delusional fantasies, and you're selecting evidence. If you look at any of these conspiracy theories, you see a little narrow thing of evidence that actually does kind of confirm their idea, but they're ignoring the huge wide circle of evidence that completely disconfirms it. And if you hone in on just those 3 or 4 facts that seem to indicate that this is a hoax started by Democrats or Bill Gates or 5G, you can believe whatever you want, but you ignore the huge wider picture of reality. So this is irrationality par excellence, evidence number 1. The other element of is, a virus isn't Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative. It's this nefarious little thing that has this mathematical logic. But in times of incredible partisanship, we can actually begin to see it as actually through the lens of politics, as opposed through the lens of science. So wearing a mask now becomes a sign of whether you're a liberal or a conservative, a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter. It's not a sign of science telling you what to do. It's now something that's incredibly partisan. This is what happened in ancient Athens and led to its downfall. It was a belief that you're either a hawk or a dove, and either side is evil and the other side is right. In this case, one side usually is sort of based on the side of science, and this can transcend party lines because there's certainly people on the right and Republicans who understand the science, but the divide is between people who believe in science and who don't believe in science. And the kind of ultimate irony of this is Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas, a Republican in the United States Congress, who thought that it was essentially a hoax and believed masks were completely not necessary at all. And what happens? Louis Gohmert himself contracts the coronavirus, and he blames it on the fact that he actually wore a mask because Nancy Pelosi had mandated that it was the mask that brought him the coronavirus, speaking of cognitive dissonance. And part of this sort of anti-science idea that seems to have spread, we can sort of see it earlier on in people dealing with ideas of global warming, because nobody wants to believe in global warming. It means, we have to suffer, we have to sacrifice. So people were denying that. But now we have people, and I find it insanely hypocritical. So, for instance, Rand Paul, who himself contracted the coronavirus, when he was questioning Anthony Fauci in a Senate hearing, he went on a rant against experts, saying, how can we trust experts? You had gotten this wrong in the beginning when you said about masks and blah, blah, blah. How do we know that you're actually right? Well, that's how science works, Mr. Paul. People get evidence and they alter their opinions. But what I find here in this decrying of experts is how hypocritical it is. So when Rand Paul contracted the coronavirus, did he entrust his health to a television commentator or to a fellow politician? No, he entrusted his health to a doctor, right? All of us are dealing with science every day. Even this interview that I'm doing over an iPhone obviously depends on elaborate amounts of technology and algorithms. So every day, all of these people who are suddenly against science and experts, they choose very selectively which science they like. They love their smartphones. They love their technology. They love the ease of their car. They love flying on airplanes with a pilot who's an expert in flying. They love having doctors that can help them deal if they come down with cancer. But if some expert comes on who has an opinion that maybe isn't so lovely, isn't so nice to what they want to believe, suddenly that expert is partisan, is on one side or the other, and is no longer a scientist. That is incredibly irrational. That's another evidence of it. I'm also seeing signs of incredible impatience. So if we go back to the Periclean strategy, it was all about having to have some sacrifice so that eventually we can move forward. But people can't wait 2 months, 3 months, which is incredible, right? I understand the pain, the jobs that are lost, the children that are home, etc. But it's only a couple months of getting something under control. No, we have to go out to our nail salons. We have to go to our tattoo parlors. We have to go to our bars. And damn it, you're not going to stop it because that's the American way. There's absolutely no, that's kind of a weakness. Think of the incredible patience of our ancestors dealing with wars and all kinds of other problems, or World War II. But we can't put up with 2 or 3 months of sacrifice to get this under control. Okay? So massive amounts of impatience. But finally, and one other thing is all of the kind of happy talk that I see on the internet. All kinds of little advice, you get these quotes that people have. They put it on Instagram or Facebook with all kinds of, things about how to be optimistic and cheerful and everything's going to be all right. And it's kind of this sort of happy talk that I see filtering all the way through social media. And I think what we really need is kind of reality talk. No, things are not happy. Things aren't good. We're in dire situation. We're facing a psychological and physical pandemic, and we need to confront reality. Now, finally, people are going to be criticizing me, and I know there are going to be little comments on YouTube saying, Robert is just being political here. This is not real. He's being subjective. That's something that people say a lot. They said that on my last couple of videos. He's just being subjective here. Whereas in the 48 Laws of Power, blah, 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 Robert was being objective. Here, he's just being political. Now, that's not the case at all. I can admit that the left or people who are liberals can be extremely irrational with their identity politics, with the social justice warrior, with their virtue signaling. There's plenty of irrationality to spread around the globe. But what these people are trying to say, which to me is so nefarious, is that there are no standards in this world. It's all partisan. So in other words, when it comes to saying that somebody is a bad strategist or a stupid strategist, or someone is a good leader or a bad leader, oh, you're just being subjective. No, we have standards. We have 4,000 years of human history. We know that Pericles rises to the level of smart, rational leadership, and that Cleon was a demagogue and led to bad leadership, causing all kinds of problems. We have examples of Abraham Lincoln, of other leaders who led to disasters. We have standards that we can say, this is good leadership, this is smart, this is intelligence, this is rational, this is irrational. So it has nothing to do with my personal political beliefs. Now, I've been discussing the kind of macro issues that we see all in front of us, sort of the obvious dramatic stuff, right? The hoaxes, the conspiracies, etc. But there's more of a micro level that I'm worried about. I see it in people today. I see it in myself. Levels of frustration and anger and rage. I'm riding my bicycle and my mask isn't on. It's down here because for whatever reason I'm drinking water or whatever. And some guy passes me by and he literally yells at me with such rage about, why aren't you wearing your mask? You feel it in the supermarket, this kind of bottled anger that could explode, right? But I'm thinking that it's even more deeper, that something is happening to us almost physically that is infecting us with kind of physical things that are going to make us irrational, and that we're going to pay for a price for this 3 or 4 or 5 months down the road. And when I'm thinking of this physical component to the irrationality now, I'm reminded of a scientist who I really, really like, who I first became acquainted with through a film in 1980 by the film director Alain Resnais, a film called Mon Oncle d'Amérique. And the scientist, his name is Henri Laborie. And this film was based on his theories. Now Laborie, he did experiments on mice. And one of his experiments, he put mice in this situation, in this kind of labyrinth, in which to get out, they could not get out of this labyrinth. They couldn't find a way out by fleeing, and they couldn't fight their way out. They couldn't fight other mice. They couldn't fight through some kind of obstacle to get out. And so they were suddenly trapped. And he studied what happened to them. And he noticed that certain strange chemicals were released into their bodies, certain hormones, very powerful hormones. And he determined that this was part of what he discovered as the brain inhibition system. Normally, our brains are structured and organized to help us take action in the world, to have certain behaviors. But when we can't act, when we're in a situation where we can't fight our way out or we can't flee, two common responses, the brain inhibition system goes into action and it releases these hormones. And he noticed that with the mice, weeks later, they had all kinds of problems. They were confused. They couldn't do solve simple problems or puzzles. Something had degraded in them for these powerful hormones that were released in the body. Now, I can't say this for certain, but I think Labourie's idea has some impact, some import here in what we're going through. We're dealing with something we can't fight, we can't flee, that's surrounding us, and it's causing all kinds of physical reactions we're not aware of that are infecting us psychologically and that are making this virus situation worse and worse and worse. So I want to come up with a solution, a simple solution for you out there listening to this as I come to the end of my talk here. And the solution is for you to grasp onto rationality as like a lifesaver that's going to help you get through these times, and it's going to literally save your life and save your brain from this psychological pandemic that we're all going through. And a lot of it is what I've talked about. You're going to go through that. You're going to see it as a bridge to reality, and you're going to make sure that you're going to go through the process that I mentioned. You're going to have the attitude that I mentioned. But most important, you're going to develop the balance that I brought up with my metaphor of the rider and the horse. So, although in this situation we can't fight or flee, there is something actually you can fight. And what you can fight is, you can't fight the irrational people in this world. There's too many of them. You'll never succeed. But you can fight your own irrationality. You can say, I'm going to stop the irrational tendencies within me. It is something that I have gone through in writing my books, etc. You begin with a very simple premise. You begin with the premise of humility. You say to yourself, Robert, I am irrational. Emotions infect my decisions. They infect my plans. I tend to see in people what I want to see. I tend to see in the world what I want to see. I'm aware of that problem, and I'm going to try and combat it. Also, instead of reacting to the fear or anger or hatred that I feel in the moment, I'm going to step back, and instead of giving into it, I'm going to try and analyze where it comes from so I can create some space between what happens to me and how I react to it. By going through these two steps of realizing how you're irrational, how your decisions are infiltrated with emotions, and how you can get more intelligence and awareness of your emotions, you can begin to create that balance between the rider and the horse, and you can use that animal energy for productive purposes instead of for believing in all kinds of irrational things. The second part of the equation is you can flee. You can flee, for instance, social media. Now, I'm not saying to get rid of social media in your life. It's too much. Even I'm not going to do that. But you can cut off your access to it. You don't need to be spending so much time on it. You don't need to be spending time on sites or with people who are kind of churning up your emotions, who are making you feel envy, who are playing on your fear and your anger and your tribal instincts. You can create some space so they have less presence in your life. And you can flee those horrible, horrible people in the world, the demagogues, the con artists, the politicians who play on our most base emotions, our basest instincts, and they try and actually make us more irrational so that they in the end can have power over us. You want to flee from them like the plague. Finally, the last thing you need to do is you need to surmount your brain over this moment, okay? So imagine a year from now. The coronavirus is mostly in the rearview mirror. We have a vaccine. Life is sort of returning back to normal, relatively so. But as we return to this new normal, we see a landscape that is devastated, that is totally changed. Businesses and business models that exist before the virus, they're gone, they're wiped out, right? It's a whole new world out there. Jobs and careers that we relied upon, they're no longer there. And we're frightened, and we're afraid, and we don't know where to go. we're facing uncertainty. Okay? And my worry is that those 5 or 6 or 8 months of being locked in, of not being able to fight or flee, of being like those kind of laboratory mice, that we're going to carry that irrationality with us a year from now when the circumstances are no longer there. We're going to be habituated with all kinds of fear responses and anxiety, and we're not going to be able to rationally assess what the world is like. You want to get your brain out of that right now. You want to put yourself a year from now and imagine, what is this world going to be like? What is the business landscape going to be like? How can I get myself out of this cycle of these emotions and these fears and these anxieties? And how can I surmount the present moment and think longer term and think of where I will be in a year and calm myself down with some key rational plans so you can begin to use that rational power that I've described rather thoroughly in this video. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm sorry it was so long. Hold on for next whenever it happens, the next podcast, which I will be dissecting human narcissism, which I believe there's another kind of epidemic. I won't quite say a pandemic, but maybe a pandemic. The roots of narcissism and what we can do about it. So thank you very much, and au revoir.